So just to get started on some basics, what is the association, its mission, and what do you do?
Well, thank you very much for having me today, and I really welcome the opportunity to talk a little bit about NJASEPS' mission and what we do. So NJASEPS, at its core, is an organization that advocates for students with disabilities and their families. So in 1974, 13 schools for students with disabilities got together to found this association. And so what do we do now today, over 50 years later? We provide curated content for those professionals to make sure that they understand best practices, get their professional development in, and do research that helps educate the broader community about what we do. We advocate on behalf of those students, their parents, and as a result of that, also on the interest of the schools, because we truly believe that these schools need to exist. So ultimately, making sure these schools exist for the portion of the students with disabilities that need them is part of that mission.
How many schools are there today? You said it started with 13 schools.
Our membership is comprised of 131 schools right now. 130 of those are what would be classified by the state of New Jersey as approved private schools for students with disabilities. And that ends up being 85 organizations. So some operate more than one school.
That's a lot of schools. Yeah. So I know in our Kids Count data, there's approximately 242,000 students who are classified as eligible for special education. And that's out of, I guess, about 1.3 million students in the preschool through K through 12. How many students are attending these partner schools?
About 10,000 students. So we're talking about the students that have the most significant disabilities of that group. Because again, our obligation under federal law is to try to provide every student with a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. And that least restrictive environment, of course, is determined based on that student's needs. So the overwhelming majority of students who are classified and have an IEP can be educated in the traditional public school setting. But when there are situations where supports that can't be provided in the public school or don't work, we're there as well.
Could you give me some examples of that? Are these children who have health issues, behavioral problems? What?
Yeah, it runs the gamut. So and this gets into the point that these schools sort of specialize in particular things. So we do have some students who are significantly medically fragile. One of our members actually also operates a hospital and a school. We talk about students with significant behavioral issues, whether that's part of a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder or not. So behaviors, medically fragile, co-occurring disability. So we think about multiply disabled. So we might have a school, for instance, that takes students who are blind and visually impaired, but have something else as well. So that they might have a significant behavioral issue, trauma, intellectual disability. Schools for students with Down syndrome as well. But really the whole gamut of behaviors, traumas, and that sort of thing.
Do schools specialize?
So each of our members has a state-approved classification for the disability, which sort of is one way that they're narrowed. And then they all have, different philosophies and take a certain portion of that student population.
How do they work with your traditional public school?
I often, when in my own advocacy, I talk about how our member schools educate 10,000 public school students with disabilities. So the student always remains the responsibility of the sending district, or more precisely, the local education authority. And so there's a lot of collaboration. When IEP meetings happen, those are still coordinated through the public school district, obviously with the input of our experts, the teachers and the therapists on the ground at the placement.
What's an IEP?
Individualized education program, or sometimes plan. And so under federal law, every student is, guaranteed a free and appropriate public education. And so when a student has disabilities, a child study team is convened to discuss those needs. And the parent is a part of the child study team. And at that point, an individual plan is created for that student, specific to their needs.
And you mentioned before that some of this is federal law, which I think is the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, IDA. Yes. I'm familiar with IDA.
Yes.
I always mess up what that actually stands for. And then there's also state law, right?
That's correct. And New Jersey actually had gotten a state law in place prior to the enactment of federal IDEA. So we have some of the strongest protections at both the state level that complement those federal protections as well.
just to walk through the process. So I have a child who might be 10 years old. It appears is having some problems in school, learning issues, right? And they determine it's a processing problem. Based on what you're saying, it's probably likely that the child study team can figure out a plan that my child can stay in the current school.
Yes, that's absolutely right.
But let's say my child also has some type of a visual problem or a hearing impairment, or as you're saying, it may be a combination of things. Is that within the discretion of the local public school to say, well, we can't help Mary's child here, so we're going to send them to one of these private partner schools? Or is it my decision as the parent who's going to do that?
It's a little bit more nuanced than that, right? So of course it's meant to be a collaborative decision-making process. So, and when you look at it from those opinions can differ. Reasonable people can disagree on what's best for the child, and they can go in either direction. So sometimes it might be the public school district that believes that the child should be referred out, and the parent actually believes that they could remain in the public school district. That's why federal law provides all sorts of administrative remedies like stay put and these sorts of things if there is a disagreement. More often than not, it's truly collaborative, and it can come from either direction. Parents will sometimes ask for their children to be evaluated, but public schools also have an obligation under child find to identify children who may have issues. So at that point, they come up with that recommendation, and that's where additional supports in the public school district could be considered. Sometimes the option might be to send to a different public school district. So if the public school district nearby has, say, a very strong autism program, the decision might be made that the child could go to that public school district. We talk about county special service districts and jointures are an option, and then we're also on the table as an option as well, which would be sort of our privately run placements. And then the continuum sort of extends from there. If our placements aren't appropriate for the child, there are some what they call Naples Act placements, which are, for lack of a better phrase, true unapproved private schools that just completely operate as a private school, and then sometimes out-of-state placements as well. So federal law requires that there needs to be a continuum of options, and so it can range from anything from small accommodations in the classroom all the way up to an out-of-district placement or out-of-state placement.
So now I have a whole lot of questions based on that. So so taking back to my child, right, who has a processing problem and maybe has a sight issue, does some of the decision ultimately may depend on how many students may have a similar issue that my child has? I mean, you spoke about county specialized schools. Is the decision making partially based on the resources available? Because I'm thinking your partner schools, the teachers have specialties, right?
Yes.
Okay. So how is that why you have to have a continuum and then everybody tries to work out the best plan? Or
yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. Again, school districts make determinations on where they want to invest resources. And so if you have a lot of students that in your district with particular needs, you might be able to build the right supports for them. Even in that case, there's going to always be students who have some situation that might be so severe or so significant that they're still an out-of-district placement. So maybe a public school district might have a really good autism program, but if the presentation of the autism and the support needs are so high, there might still be a referral in that case. But also, to your point, perhaps most of the student needs trend in one direction. If you have a student with something completely different, or some things that just can't be accommodated, say like a severe medical fragile situation,
where they actually can't be around other students, right? Because their immune system is impacted.
Correct. Yes.
Do other states have a similar association to NJASEPS?
Yes. So we do have some sister associations. Massachusetts has one, Virginia, Maryland, Illinois, California. So there's a few out there. Mm-hmm. They generally are in the states where most of these sorts of schools happen to exist. But there are schools like this generally all across the country. And that's why we also have a national association that represents our interests, which is the National Association of Private Special Education Centers as well.
And does your association help get, you mentioned teacher training and things, or the certifications. Does it help the schools get accredited by New Jersey? is there a special accreditation for these schools?
So there's an approval status at the state level, and we certainly do provide some support in schools that are interested in becoming approved or to add an additional approved school that if they want to operate another one. What's nice too is our national association does provide an accreditation for those schools that want to go that step further, which is known as NJASEPS. But there's other accreditations out there, and our schools often try to seek the ones that are most relevant to the student populations they're serving.
How does a parent find your schools? Do they go to your website and there's a list of every school and what they provide, or is there some other mechanism, or do they wait for the public school to say, in my case, Mary, this is where your child should go?
I think from the public school side, there's often a preference for it to look like that really it's about figuring out, because I think the public school rightfully wants to see if they can support the student in their district. And so, but to answer your question, both the parents and school districts do go to our website to look up the list of schools. The state maintains a list as well. A lot of that is also based off of relationships and reputation as well. So a school district may have had very good experiences sending students to particular schools, and then those will be first in mind. One of the challenges is there's no state reimbursement for transportation. So of course, the distance matters. Again, sometimes there's no choice depending on where the student's located in the state. But the goal is also to try not to have students be on buses for very long periods of time either.
And what's your website?
So our website is www.njaseps.org.
The qualifications of teachers, what are the types of specialties that these private partner schools have?
In almost all instances, the teachers teaching these schools will have a traditional teaching license, which would be either, elementary ed, secondary ed, or, in a subject matter. And then they'll also have a teacher of students with disabilities endorsement on top of that. And then for schools that are teaching students who are blind or visually impaired, there's an additional certification on top of that. So so you have to have an underlying teaching license, and then you're sort of adding these additional credentials on top of it.
And I guess that makes sense to our earlier comments that for one or two students, it doesn't necessarily make sense for the public school to have a person with a specialty if there is a partner school within reasonable distance who can provide that assistance, right?
That's correct.
Do some of the teachers, or do any teachers from the partner schools ever actually work within the traditional public school?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, just thinking about the talent pipeline in general. Sometimes we will get teachers who start their career in one of our schools and then will get hired by a public school district or a special services district to help set up a program or help continue a program. We also, as you can imagine, get teachers after retirement that want to come and do this as well. So they might, if they're in the tier 1 of the pensions, state pension, they'll collect their pension and come work for us. Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit of that. And then in general, people just choose their careers however they want. There's definitely a value to being able to teach in either of those settings for sure.
Do teachers work in these schools because they have a different commitment to students, or do you think it's just an interest in a certain behavioral problem that draws them to schools?
It's definitely often a commitment to being able to teach students with disabilities, particular populations for sure. We're actually going to be rolling out in the very near future a campaign entitled "This is Special Education," where we're going to be having teachers and other professionals tell their story of why they got into this business. Mm-hmm. What's interesting in some cases is individuals might start, say, as a paraprofessional and then go become teacher certified. And we're strongly in favor of legislation and other regulatory changes that encourages that sort of talent pipeline, because too often, one of our schools might interview someone who has all of the credentials on paper and says all the right things in the interview, but they don't really understand the student population they're working with. Not the same way as someone who has spent time working with them already and wants to continue to do so.
That's interesting. So what you're saying, the paraprofessional, they could be basically a teacher's aide. Right. And I don't want to minimize that talent because it does require a lot of support for these students, right? So you're saying that commitment is there, and then who is paying for them to continue their education? Are they doing it to get certified?
Yes, and that is what they would be doing. And again, often their employers, giving them the time to be away to do whatever they have to. One of the challenges, and I'm not saying that we would change this, but in order to be certified in the state, you do have to get some student teaching in and that sort of thing. So that can change. That makes it difficult to maintain your full-time job and do that.
Thank you so much for watching. Check out the full conversation by clicking the link in the top right corner or the link in the description. And be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and hit the bell if you enjoyed the video and want to be updated when our new interviews are released.